Hi friends, so now I will explain another very important question for the interview room from servlets area. ServletConfig, ServletContext. What is the difference between ServletConfig and ServletContext? Sir, why this question is very important? What is the difference between ServletConfig and ServletContext? Do you know similarity in the words ServletConfig, ServletContext? Similarity in the words, similarity in the functionality. Are you getting? Similarity in the words, similarity in the behavior. Yes, this question is very important for the interview room. Just a small difference is there. What that difference you people should tell. Are you getting right? In the interview person expectation is always what is that small minor difference between ServletConfig and ServletContext. Both are servlet related terminology only, but one is config, the other one is context. What is that difference? Okay, like, sir, very simple. You people should aware at very top level. I will explain in detail, but at very top level you people should aware, sir. I have one web application is there. Assume that I have one web application is there. Okay, web application 1. It may be mail send application or order processing application. Any application is there. Within the web application, we can write n number of servlets. Okay, we can use n number of servlets, sir. Are you getting? Sir, I have one web application is there. And I have multiple servlets are there within that web application. Not only servlet, JSPs are there. Next and after that HTML pages, XML, like there are several components are there. Sir, this one we have to host inside web server. Are you getting? Or sometimes you may use application server also. Sometimes we may use one application server also, right? Sir, now my question is, observe that. I have one server is there. Within that, I deployed one application. Within that application, multiple servlets are there. So now observe, for every servlet, web container will create one ServletConfig object. For every servlet, web container will create one ServletConfig object. Sir, now my question is, per servlet, how many ServletConfig objects are available, sir? Only one ServletConfig object. Suppose I have, sir, 3 servlets are there. Then how many config objects are available, sir? 3 config objects. Of course, what is the purpose, how to get, how you can use, that part we will discuss. First, better to get some basic idea. What is ServletConfig? For every servlet, web container will create one ServletConfig object. If I have 10 servlets are there, then how many ServletConfig objects are there? 10 ServletConfig objects are there. I hope are you able to understand, right? But now, how many web applications are there? Of course, in our context, only one web application is there. For every web application, web container will create one ServletContext object. Okay, ServletContext is related to web application, total web application, but ServletConfig is related to every servlet. Is it clear, right? First you have to get the basic idea, and then what is the purpose of ServletConfig, ServletContext, all these things I will explain. Sir, now my question is very clear, or my conclusion is very clear. Sir, for every servlet, web container will create one ServletConfig object. But for total web application, web container will create one ServletContext object. ServletConfig is per servlet, ServletContext is per web application. Remember that, sir. First level point, you should have the basic idea, right? Sir, now here within the web application, 10 servlets are there, 10 ServletConfig objects are there. But for I have only one web application, only one ServletContext object is available. Clear for all of you, right? Top level, first important point, ServletConfig per servlet, ServletContext per web application, right? That's all. So now up to this is the clear. ServletConfig, ServletContext. Let me talk in detail about the ServletConfig first, and then we will talk about ServletContext. First one, sir, who is the responsible to create ServletConfig object? Web container is responsible to create ServletConfig object. Are you getting? For every servlet, web container is the responsible to create ServletConfig object. First point. When the ServletConfig object will be created, at the time of servlet object creation, web container will create ServletConfig object. When the ServletConfig object will be destroyed, at the time of servlet object destruction, automatically the corresponding config object by default will be destroyed. Sir, as long as servlet object is there, automatically the corresponding config object is always available. Regarding to hold the configuration information of the servlet, for every servlet, web container is going to create one config object, which is nothing but ServletConfig object. Are you getting that? Okay. Sir, who is the responsible to create? Web container is the responsible. When the config object will be created? At the time of servlet object creation. When the config object will be destroyed? At the time of servlet object destruction. Sir, usually at what time servlet object will be destroyed? If the web container feels that this servlet no longer required, I want to give the retirement for this servlet because some memory problem is there, then automatically web container is going to destroy, call destroy method, destroy that object. Once a servlet object destroyed, automatically config object by default will be destroyed. Are you getting? As long as servlet object is there, the corresponding config object is always available, right? Clear, right? Okay. Next one, third one. Sir, here, how the web container hand over the config object to the servlet? Web container is the responsible to create config object. Sir, web container has to hand over that object to the servlet so that servlet can get that object. Servlet can use that object, right? Sir, how the web container can hand over this config object, right? Sir, after creating servlet object, immediately web container is going to call init method. After creating servlet object, immediately web container will call which method? Init method. What is the argument to init method? Is ServletConfig only. Are you getting? As the argument to init method, web container hand over its config object to the servlet. Is it clear for all of it? Okay, this is. So, the argument to init method, web container hand over this config object to the servlet, right? Now, config object came to the servlet. But within the servlet, I want to get that config object, sir. How you can get? What is the method we have to get config object? Very simple. We can use ServletConfig. Config is equal to, if you want to get ServletConfig object, very simple, within the servlet you have to call which method, sir? Get ServletConfig method. Are you getting? Which method you have to call? Get ServletConfig method. This method already available in servlet interface, right? Automatically available for our servlet also. Remember, by using which method, servlet, within the servlet we can get its config object by using get ServletConfig method. Here I have a small doubt, of course very important for the interview room also, sir. ServletConfig is an interface present in javax.servlet package. Sir, we are getting ServletConfig object. For the interface, how you can create an object, man? So how it is possible? Sir, simple. It is not the object of ServletConfig interface. It is the object of its implemented class object. Are you getting? Sir, for the ServletConfig interface implemented by, there is some implementation class is there. That implementation class object we are going to get. Sir, who is the responsible to provide implementation, right? Web server vendor is responsible to provide implementation for this. So don't get confused. ServletConfig is an interface of we are getting object. Sorry, it's a implementation class object we are going to get. Web server vendor is responsible to provide implementation class. Sir, why you are not using its implementation class name directly? Why you are using interface name? Simple, sir. Interface names are always fixed, but implementation class names are varied from server to server. That's why, sir, varied from server to server. I don't want to use that. Fixed names I will use within my servlet program. Clear for all of you, right? So, web container, create config object for every servlet and hand over that to the servlet, the argument to init method. Within the servlet, I got config object by using which method, sir? Get ServletConfig method. Now, in the servlet, you have your config object, right? By using this config object, within the servlet, what we can do? What operations we can able to perform? Very simple, sir. Servlet can get its configuration information by using config object. Sir, config, servlet configuration information, ServletConfig is going to provide to the servlet. Where this configuration information is available, which information is considered as configuration information, total what methods you can call on the config object, you should have the basic idea. Sir, can you please tell, within the web.xml, how to declare servlet, sir? Can you please guide? Web app, within the servlet, within that we can use servlet name we can use, and then servlet class. Next, there are several init params you can declare. Parameter name, parameter value, next init param. Okay, like within the servlet, these many tags we can able to declare. If you observe sample applications are sample. So now observe, this is the web.xml. Within that I want to declare servlet. Within that servlet name, servlet class, init parameters and so on. This servlet name, which is also known as logical name of servlet. Suppose assume that first servlet. This is the logical name, sir. This one is called logical name. Itself is configuration information only. Next, do you know servlet class? Okay, sir, here com dot ICICI Bank dot loan processing servlet. Loan processing servlet like this I took, sir. Assume that servlet class. Okay, sir, this is the original name, developer's name. This one is called what? Logical name. Next, there are several parameters you can able to configure. Something like usernames, passwords, like this. This information is by default considered as configuration information of the servlet. So within the servlet, if you want to get its configuration information, sir, how it is going to get? By using what? ServletConfig object. Are you getting? Sir, what methods are there? How I can get this config object, sir? Very simple. Sir, once you got config object, yes, I got config object. On this, exactly 4 methods only you can go into call. Sir, that 4 methods information itself is nothing but configuration information of the servlet. Sir, what is the first method I can call? Get servlet name. What is the first method, sir? Get servlet name is the first method. Second method, get init parameter. Sir, this servlet name is nothing but logical name of the servlet. Servlet name itself is nothing but what? Logical name of the servlet. Next, get init parameter. Get init parameter. Get init parameter names. Get init parameter names. These 2 methods talks about initialization parameters. Regarding servlet initialization parameter, how I can access those values by using these 2 methods, right? Next, on the config object, if you want, you can ask, hey servlet, your belongs to some application. What is the context of that application? Can you please provide your servlet context? If you want, on the config object, you can call get servlet context method. I hope are you getting? Sir, only these are the allowed methods on the config object. You can get logical info, logical name of the servlet. You can get init parameters information. You can get the reference to context object also. This is the use of servlet config object. So within the servlet, to get this information, we can able to use one servlet config object. Are you able to understand? Right? Okay, this is so these are things what you people should aware clearly, right? Sir, let me summarize all these points whatever I covered. Sir, now just observe whatever the points we covered related to servlet config. Just let me summarize once so that you people can able to understand easily. Here just observe servlet config. Okay, for every servlet, web container creates one servlet config object. For every servlet, how many servlet config object will be created? One. Next, servlet config object will be created at the time of servlet object creation and destroyed at the time of servlet object destruction. Next, once a context object created, how the web container hand over that object to servlet server. Web container hand overs config object to the servlet as argument to which method, sir? Init method. As the argument to init method, web container will hand over servlet config object, right? Within the servlet, I want to get config object. How you can get? Which method we have to call? Get servlet config method. If I call get servlet config method, now I will get the corresponding servlet config object. Sir, it is not here. It's a very important. I covered already, sir. Servlet config is an interface. How you can get an object? It's not object of interface. It is the object of its implementation class provided by web server vendor. It is not object of javax.servlet.servletconfig. It is the object of its implementation class provided by web server vendor. Okay, sir, by using config object, servlet can get its configuration information. Which is called configuration information, sir? Have you observed? Logical name of servlet, initialization parameters, etc. Okay, this is called what? Configuration information. How servlet can get its configuration information on the config object? Which methods we have to call? These are the only possible methods you can call on the config object. Sir, only 4 methods only. Get servlet name, get init parameter names, and then what? Get servlet context. That's all. So these are the important loopholes you people should be aware about servlet config. Let me start how you can use servlet config object, 1 or 2 use cases, right? So now observe how we can use the servlet config object within the web application. Just 1 or 2 use cases I will explain. Sir, here just observe use case 1, sir. What is my use case here is observe. Suppose this is my Java program. Of course, this is my application. Sir, it's my servlet, sir. Assume that it's a servlet. My programming requirement is I have to communicate with the database, sir. I have to communicate with the database. From servlet, if you want to communicate with the database, compulsory you have to use driver class name, next and after that username and the password of database. Next, very important, sir, JDBC URL also. Are you getting JDBC URL? Sir, if I am using within the servlet, then I can able to communicate with the database, right? But now the problem is we can hard code these values within the servlet. If I hard code these values within the servlet, for the security reasons, for every 3 months I have to change the password. For every 3 months, if we require to change a servlet, if you are changing that within the servlet, then we have to recompile, we have to rebuild application, we have to redeploy application, and sometimes we have to restart the server also must be required, which is going to create a big business impact to the client. Are you getting right? So if anything which changes frequently, Such type of variable things never recommended to hard code in our servlet, right? How you can do that? Very simple. These are things I will configure within the web.xml as initialization parameters. Have you observed, right? Corresponding servlet tag is there. Within the tag I covered already. We can declare any number of unit params. Sir, within the unit param we can take param name, something like user, param value, Scott, something like that we can take, sir. I hope you people can aware, right? So now such type of variable things we can configure in the web.xml as a servlet initialization parameter. Once I configure that, from the servlet I can get these values by using config.getInitParameter method. Are you getting? Config dot which method, sir? GetInitParameter method. Sir, by using config object, happily we can able to read the corresponding parameters, right? Then immediately you ask, sir, instead of hard coding within the servlet, if I configured in the web.xml, what is the advantage, sir? Very simple. Tomorrow password changed. Tomorrow password got changed. Where I require to change that password? Within the web.xml. If I change in the web.xml to reflect that change, these things are not required. Just a redeployment is enough. Matter of 1 or 2 minutes job. Are you getting? So, but if I change that within the servlet, n number of activities I have to do, sir. Recompile, rebuild, redeploy, restart, all these things are required. But the same change if I do inside web.xml, just a redeployment is enough. Automatically that change by default will be reflected to the servlet. So from the servlet, if you want to read the database specific initialization parameters which are declared inside web.xml, which object must be required, sir? ServletConfig object must be required. So ServletConfig is the biggest asset to our servlet, right? Are you getting the first use case, right? Sir, second use case I will explain where you can use the ServletConfig object, sir. Very, very simple, sir. Suppose I have one web application is there. I have one web application is there, sir. Sir, I have first servlet is there and the second servlet is there. Sir, my business requirement is whenever a request reaches servlet 1, okay, I have to forward the request to the second servlet. Are you getting? So my business requirement, after completing some preliminary operations, the request should be forwarded to second servlet. To achieve this, to dispatch our request to another component, sir, here we should go for request dispatcher. Are you getting? What is the purpose of request dispatcher, sir? To dispatch our request from one component to another component. For that we can get request dispatcher. There are multiple ways are there to get request dispatcher, sir. One way is we can call get named dispatcher. What is this, sir? Get named dispatcher. Here we have to provide logical name of servlet. Logical name of servlet, right? Sir, how I can get its logical name? How I can get logical name of the servlet? Sir, this one is nothing but by using on the config object you can call get servlet name method. Are you getting? Get servlet name method. Sir, get servlet name method is available in the config object only. By using logical name we can able to get request dispatcher. Sir, how I can get that logical name of the servlet? By using what? Get servlet name method, right? I hope are you in a position to understand. Sir, sometimes, of course, very rare we have this type of requirement, but make sure sometimes within the servlet, if I want to get its logical name, whatever you configured in the web.xml, happily we can able to get by using config object, get servlet name method, right? That's all, sir. This is about servlet config object.